Welcome to another episode of Conspiracy Tapes by Skoob, the podcast that pulls back the velvet curtain on Hollywood's most devastating secrets. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and today we're diving deep into a story that's been decades in the making. A story of fame, addiction, and the deadly prescription drug culture that has claimed some of our most beloved celebrities. From Marilyn Monroe's tragic end in 1962 to Matthew Perry's shocking death in 2023, we'll explore how the very industry that creates our heroes often becomes complicit in their destruction. This isn't just about celebrity gossip. This is about a systemic problem that reaches from the glittering hills of Hollywood to small towns across America. Let's start our journey in Hollywood's golden era, where the seeds of today's prescription drug crisis were first planted. Picture this. It's the 1940s, and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer is the most powerful studio in Hollywood. Young performers are working grueling schedules, and the studio system demands perfection at any cost. This is where Judy Garland's story begins, not as a cautionary tale, but as a routine part of Hollywood business. Judy herself would later claim that the studio forced drugs on her, saying, "They'd give us pep-up pills to keep us on our feet long after we were exhausted. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us cold with sleeping pills." But here's where the story gets complicated. Most people who were there at the time find it difficult to accept Judy's version entirely. The truth is more insidious than forced medication. It was a culture where drugs were normalized, readily available, and barely questioned. The MGM lot was like a pharmaceutical free-for-all. Hairdressers and makeup artists were walking pharmacies, ready to satisfy a performer's every need. Many drugs, now considered dangerous, were then available without prescription, and prescriptions were easily obtained for the rest. Few people understood the dangerous side effects, and almost no one considered that these pills might be habit-forming. Judy had what we might call the perfect storm of vulnerability. She had the kind of metabolism that welcomed foreign agents and transformed them into hungers that could never be satisfied. Coming from a theater background, she was accustomed to staying up late and sleeping late, but Hollywood demanded early morning calls. She'd come home from a date at midnight before a 5 o'clock call, sit up reading or listening to records, then gulp down sleeping pills for 2 or 3 hours of rest. The next day, she'd need uppers just to function, which only made her insomnia worse. What's crucial to understand is that this wasn't some evil conspiracy of men forcing pills down Judy's throat. It was something far more dangerous, a system that worked performers to the point of exhaustion while actively promoting a policy of replacing reality with polished fictions. They didn't just give her drugs. They created an environment where drugs became the only logical solution to an impossible situation. Fast forward to August 1962, and we encounter the death that would define celebrity overdoses for generations to come. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home, the victim of what appeared to be a suicidal overdose of barbiturates, the same class of drugs that had been circulating through Hollywood for decades. What's particularly tragic about Monroe's case is that, by all accounts, at least one of her doctors was actually trying to wean her off her drug dependence. This wasn't a case of medical malpractice in the traditional sense. It was the collision of addiction, mental health struggles, and the pressures of fame. But Monroe's death was just the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself with devastating regularity. 3 years later, in 1965, Dorothy Dandridge, the first African American to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, was found dead by her manager. Her death was ruled an accidental overdose of imipramine, an antidepressant she was taking for bipolar disorder. Then came Jimi Hendrix in 1970, found dead in his girlfriend's London hotel room. The cause of death? Inhalation of vomit after barbiturate intoxication, the exact same prescription medication that had killed Monroe. The pattern was becoming clear. Prescription drugs, obtained legally, were killing our most talented performers. The cycle continued through the decades. Margot Hemingway, granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway, died of a suicidal overdose of phenobarbital in 1996. Heath Ledger won a posthumous Oscar after his accidental drug overdose in 2008, involving multiple prescription medications. 2 doctors were investigated by the DEA following his death, but no charges were filed. Here's the thing that makes these deaths so particularly tragic. None of these celebrities were following doctors' orders when they died. They had access to prescription medications, but they were using them in ways that no physician would recommend. The question becomes, how did prescription drugs intended to heal become the instruments of destruction for so many talented individuals? To understand how prescription drug addiction takes hold in celebrity culture, we need to examine the complex web of enablement that surrounds famous individuals. It's not always as simple as pointing fingers at doctors or studios. Sometimes the very people who claim to love these celebrities become part of the problem. Consider the case of Kurt Cobain, whose struggle with addiction reveals the twisted logic that can overtake families caught up in substance abuse. Those around Kurt noticed something disturbing. He was actually easier to deal with when he was on drugs. When he was suffering the physical pain of withdrawal, he became impossible to be around. As one observer noted, the whole getting him to stop using drugs theory was absurd and ultimately damaging to Kurt. Drugs are a problem when they are impacting your ability to have a house or maintain a job. Until they become a problem of that nature, you just leave the person alone. But this reasoning ignores the progressive nature of addiction. By 1993, Kurt felt like he was living under constant surveillance. Every time his bandmates, family, managers, or crew encountered him, they did a quick survey to determine whether he was high or not. He experienced this inspection dozens of times each day and was furious when people assumed he was stoned when he wasn't. Kurt's journal entries from this period reveal the desperate loneliness that often accompanies addiction. Friends who I can talk to and hang out and have fun with. I can't stop pulling my hair out, please. I don't care if it's the out of the in crowd. I just need a crowd, a gang, a reason to smile. I'm so tired of crying and dreaming. I'm so alone. Isn't there anyone out there? Please help me. Help me. The medical system failed Kurt in spectacular fashion. His drug rehabilitation physician, 60-year-old Robert Fremont, was found dead in his Beverly Hills office, slumped over his desk. His cause of death was ruled a heart attack, though his son claimed it was suicide by overdose. The doctor himself had become addicted to drugs. At the time of his death, Fremont was being investigated for overprescribing buprenorphine to his patients. He had been dispensing the drug to Kurt by the carton. Sometimes the most dangerous enablers are those closest to us, the people we love and who claim to love us back. The relationship between Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown perfectly illustrates how 2 people can drag each other into the abyss of addiction. For years, the public narrative was simple. Bobby Brown, with his bad boy image, corrupted America's sweetheart. It was an easy story to believe, and even Bobby seemed willing to accept that blame, perhaps to protect Whitney from shame. But the truth was far more complex and troubling. Bobby was indeed a drinker who liked to smoke weed, but his introduction to cocaine came from his wife. He caught Whitney doing a line on their wedding day. When she offered it to him the next time, he tried it. Then Whitney's brother Michael introduced them both to smoking cocaine, freebasing, as their use escalated. The progression was relentless. Bobby would eventually have a stroke from his excessive drug use, but even that wasn't enough to get him to stop. The birth of their daughter, Bobby Christina, in 1993, the year after Whitney suffered a miscarriage while filming The Bodyguard, wasn't enough to curb their use either. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Bobby's later memoir was his description of how he and Whitney believed they were successfully hiding their drug use from Bobby Christina. His slow realization that this was impossible came from understanding a simple truth. They were high all the time. Whitney's habit intensified after being clean during her pregnancy. The cultural context matters here. Whitney came of age during a time when our understanding of drugs went from the glorious, free-spirited hedonism of the 70s to the aggressive policing and shame of Reagan's war on drugs. The line between getting high socially and full-on dependency isn't easy to pinpoint, especially with misunderstood and criminalized party drugs. A critical checkpoint came in 1995 with a cocaine overdose that was kept out of public view. This happened during the filming of Waiting to Exhale, and Whitney's bodyguard wrote a desperate plea to her management company. In the letter, he outlined concerns over the dangers of her dependence, noting that Whitney had acknowledged being emotionally dependent on narcotics and expressing worry that her voice was being damaged from smoking cocaine. By the time she was filming The Preacher's Wife a year later, Whitney told Oprah that she was using daily and felt as if she had lost herself. When she pulled out of promotional events, it was explained away with careful wording about throat issues. As we move into the 21st century, the prescription drug crisis that had been simmering in Hollywood for decades exploded into a national epidemic. The same dynamics that had been killing celebrities for years were now claiming lives across all socioeconomic levels. Doctors began overprescribing pain medications and sedatives not just to Grammy winners and Academy Award nominees, but to truck drivers, plumbers, and housewives. In many states, especially Florida, pill mills began blooming like toxic flowers, where cash was exchanged for pills to treat ubiquitous complaints like lower back pain, migraines, and fibromyalgia. The scope of this problem became staggering. In some counties, there were more pain clinics than McDonald's restaurants. Near medical examiners' offices, you could observe a new type of tourism. Pillbillies, who would travel from Kentucky and West Virginia to obtain oxycodone and alprazolam for their supposed illnesses, then transport them back home for distribution. The celebrity deaths continued with depressing regularity, but now they were part of a much larger pattern. A few states passed legislation requiring mandatory and confidential pharmacy databases to track doctors who were giving out pills upon request, but these measures met with only limited success. The fundamental problem remained unchanged. Until stiffer penalties for both prescribing physicians and abusing patients were enacted and enforced, people would continue to kill themselves, their friends, and their idols with prescription medications. And there would always be physicians willing to inadvertently assist them. Which brings us to one of the most recent and shocking celebrity drug deaths, Matthew Perry, beloved star of Friends, who was found dead in his hot tub in October 2023. Perry's death illustrates how little has changed in the fundamental dynamics of celebrity addiction, despite decades of awareness and supposed progress. There was no single, inevitable conclusion to Matthew Perry's story. Many different outcomes were possible. The question of whether he was capable of giving informed consent is complex, and demonstrating a lack of consent is extremely difficult. Modern legal standards make it challenging to detain an individual against their will, even when there are clear concerns about their well-being. Perry's death was ultimately attributable to acute addiction, much like a person who undergoes multiple rounds of chemotherapy before losing a battle with cancer. A sustained effort met with an outcome none had hoped for. Yet public discussion often oversimplifies his cause of death with statements like, "he drowned," or "it was cardiac arrest," obscuring the broader context of long-term substance use and its cumulative effects. The legal aftermath of Perry's death revealed the same patterns we've seen for decades. On December 3, 2025, California physician Dr. Salvador Plasencia was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to illegally distributing ketamine to Perry. Court documents showed that Plasencia supplied Perry with multiple doses in the month prior to his death, including at-home injections and deliveries through Perry's assistant, despite being aware of Perry's vulnerability as an addict. Although prosecutors confirmed that Plasencia didn't provide the exact dose involved in Perry's fatal overdose, the court ruled that his actions contributed to and enabled the addiction that ultimately led to Perry's death. He was the first of 5 individuals charged in connection with the case to be convicted and incarcerated. What's perhaps most troubling about this entire saga is our cultural inability to honestly confront addiction as a legitimate health condition. Substance misuse contributes to an enormous number of deaths each year, whether through alcohol, ketamine, opioids, or other drugs. Yet obituaries almost never state death due to acute addiction, reflecting a cultural tendency toward shame, denial, and minimization. This denial extends to how we discuss celebrity deaths. We focus on the glamour, the tragedy, the waste of talent, but we rarely engage with the systematic factors that create and maintain addiction. We want to know the explicit details of Whitney's drug use or Kurt's final days, but are we seeking understanding of what they were up against? Or is it just too difficult to reconcile the fact that brilliant artists can struggle with addiction like many of us? The truth is that doctors have killed people. There's no doubt about it. But the death toll from medical murder, malfeasance, and malpractice is dwarfed by the carnage that patients have inflicted on themselves and those around them through drug abuse. We prefer to focus on the villains, the evil doctors, the enabling studios, the corrupt system, because it's easier than confronting the complex reality of addiction as a disease. All right, so we come back to the question at the heart of this story. Can it be stopped? Not completely, but it can be changed. Prescription drug abuse isn't just a Hollywood tragedy. It's a national crisis that affects millions of families far from the spotlight. Matthew Perry's death, like those of Judy Garland, Marilyn Monroe, Kurt Cobain, and Whitney Houston, forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Addiction thrives in systems that offer easy access, silence, and stigma. These stars weren't weak, they were human, struggling with a disease in a culture that punished vulnerability instead of treating it. Their deaths weren't inevitable, but they were tragically predictable. And here's the part we haven't fully explored yet: the decisions, warnings, and missed chances that could have changed everything. To uncover the deeper connections, unseen failures, and the full story behind Hollywood's drug culture, download the Skoob app now. Get exclusive access to the complete episode and more untold stories that don't make headlines. This was Conspiracy Tapes. Join us next time as we continue peeling back the myths behind fame, addiction, and survival.